What's up? It's Marco, Sage of Soccer, and today I'll be going for my US men's national team of the season. And this is something that I wanted to make because I feel like there's been a lot of negativity surrounding US men's national team players in Europe, and I understand why. A lot of our star players had a pretty bad year. Christian Pulisic didn't get going at Chelsea at all. Serginho Dest didn't have a good year at all. And then Gio Reyna was kind of never really got going for Dortmund despite some good performances there. But there's been like a perception that this is the worst year for Americans abroad. But I think there's been a good amount of positive, and I want to talk about that. Is we had some really strong performances by some players, some guys breaking out this season, and there's a lot of good to talk about. And so I'm going to go over my team of the season, and I should say that this will scale with the league that they're playing in. So, for example, let's compare Jedi Robinson to Joe Gayu. If Joe Gayu had a really good season in Sweden, as opposed to Jedi having just an average season in the Premier League, I'd be taking Jedi, and I think Jedi's not a real spoiler. Left back's such a weak position for the squad. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into it. In goal, I'm going with Ethan Horvath, who had a solid season for Luton Town that ended with him getting promotion to the Premier League. He was only there on loan, but he's still a Premier League keeper with Nottingham Forest, so we'll have to see where he ends up. Maybe Luton Town will buy him, maybe he'll go back to the Championship, but it's the second straight year he helped a team get promotion. Even if Forest, it was only coming in off the bench at the very end. But still, solid year for Ethan Horvath. Now, I think it's pretty fair to compare him to Zach Steffen. They had very similar seasons, but I think just with the team performance, I'm probably going to give it to Ethan Horvath in the end. And Matt Turner did have a decent year for Arsenal coming off the bench for them, being their cup goalkeeper. But I think that it didn't go as well for him, and he even got benched as the cup goalkeeper towards the end. So I think Ethan Horvath is the best choice for this spot. And I would have been excited to watch him for the Nations League. It looks like he picked up an injury in that playoff final, but we'll have to see where he ends up making a move. But I think, a lot of teams will be interested in him, especially as a lot of the Premier League clubs that got relegated were because they had a very inexperienced keeper. So maybe he'll be able to get a good job. So we'll have to look out for that. But I think Ethan Horvath earned a spot on this team this season. Center back was actually a really strong position for this group. I actually making this a back three because we have to include a good amount of really talented players. Starting off first, Cameron Carter-Vickers. I mean, I'm just going to be saying the same thing I said about him last year, all season this year. Just an amazing defender for Celtic. I mean, I think he's, like I've said before, best center back coming out of Scotland since Virgil van Dijk. Just doing everything he can there to help lead Celtic to titles. And with how well he did and his boss getting a job at Tottenham being his former club, you have to wonder if he'll end up joining them. I mean, it is a bit of a long shot, but I think a move to the Premier League is definitely in the cards. I think he's earned that, and I'd really like to see what he can do next season. And speaking of Premier League center backs, Tim Ream didn't end perfectly with him getting an injury, but he helped Fulham stay up this season. And Fulham, they've been a club where they've just been yo-yoing in between the Premier League and the Championship for how long has it been? Like 5 years now, and they finally were able to stick in the Premier League. And throughout that time, Tim Ream has typically been their championship center back. Then he'd get benched in the Premier League. Well, they finally kept him going in the Premier League, and they finally stayed up. And I don't think it's a coincidence. He was very solid this season and just did a great job on the ball. We saw him get praised by Pep Guardiola. And I think that he might have earned a spot staying with Fulham next year. And as a U.S. men's national team fan, you have to wonder how long he can keep going because he's not a player who relies on pace. He has only gotten better with age. So we'll have to see if he can continue to build off this and maybe be even better next season. And then lastly, we got Mark McKenzie. And this was the most on the bubble pick, but I think McKenzie definitely earned this. Just finally was able to become an established starter in Belgium. It took him a long time, but he was able to do that, and he had a very strong season for Genk. They were almost able to win the title. They just came up short at the end, but I think he had a very good year. He's another guy who has a lot of really good traits, and he might finally be starting to put it all together. So hopefully Mark McKenzie can really start to show off that talent. And then some honorable mentions because center back was a very good group. Austin Trusty had a solid year for Birmingham in the championship. And if John Brooks played his full season at Hoffenheim, I think he'd be in this list. Now, I won't give it to him because he just had a terrible time at Benfica, which, man, I made me almost give up on him. I honestly did give up on him. I started removing him from the team, but he started to show his talent again at Hoffenheim. I think he probably should have been back with the U.S. men's national team for the Nations League. But I think because of his first half of the year, I got to give it to McKenzie, Ream, and Cameron Carter-Vickers, and center back was a pretty strong position for the U.S. this year, so that's a good sign. Then we have right back, which I think was the toughest position to pick, which is kind of a good thing because we had some decent performances, but nobody who really stood out as a great performer. And I end up going with Bryan Reynolds, who had a breakout season in Belgium. And this is a year for him where he's finally able to really put his offensive abilities together. Got a good amount of assists for this year, was contributing to attack while being solid defensively. And he's been linked with a lot of good moves abroad, and I think I got to give it to Bryan Reynolds. But there were a lot of good performances to choose from. I feel kind of bad leaving out Marlon Fossey, who had a very strong year in Belgium as well. I honestly could go back and forth on who was the better performer out of them this year because Reynolds continues to get call-ups to the U.S. men's national team and gets more links abroad. I think I'm going with him, which, I don't know, might be a bit harsh, but I think, if there's something that other people are seeing, I think you kind of got to go with it. Joe Scally did have a pretty good year in the Bundesliga, but he wasn't an established starter, and when he was performing, he wasn't anything like truly above average. So I think I'd be going with Bryan Reynolds over him. I do want to mention Lyndon Gooch, who had a pretty solid season for Sunderland, but I don't think it was enough to upseed Reynolds, who I think might have turned this year into a very good move. Maybe even playing time with Roma. Who knows? We'll have to see. And I think Reynolds, very solid season. And then going from right back, the hardest position, to the easiest position, left back. I already gave this away. It's Jedi Robinson. Maybe give a shout out to Sam Vines for his team winning the title in Belgium, but he wasn't really a big part of that. Jedi Robinson, just solid year in the Premier League. I think that's all I can really ask for. Really got to show off his defensive abilities. A good part of Fulham staying up, and maybe he can turn that into a better offensive season next year and really start to contribute to that team because Fulham, they looked very good this year. You have to wonder if they'll get hit with second season syndrome. I think I said before the year that if Mitrovic was able to score double digits, I felt confident in them staying up. He was able to do that. Will he be able to keep that form? We'll have to see. Will their moves work out? We'll have to see. They've been kind of historically, they spent a lot. But okay, that's enough about Fulham. Jedi had a really good season, and he deserves to be on this list. Next, I'm going into the midfield, which is another pretty tough one to pick, but I feel pretty good about the group. Starting off, Tyler Adams, probably the best U.S. men's national team player this season if you count the World Cup, the season that he had in the Premier League. He was a diamond in the rough for Leeds. I mean, obviously they got relegated, but I think they partially got relegated because he got injured and wasn't there to help them. He did a pretty good job replacing Calvin Phillips and just a solid defensive player who I'm expecting to either stay in the Premier League or get a good move abroad. I think he's had a really solid season, and despite Leeds going down, he was definitely the best American there, and I think he showed his stuff and established himself that he should be staying in the Premier League. Then I'm going with Malik Tillman, who had a very good year for Rangers, put up really impressive goal scoring numbers. Like, when I was double checking this list, it's just like, wow, he was going off this year. I think he proved he's, you know, probably like Cameron Carter-Vickers, just too good for the league. He's probably not going to break in at Bayern Munich, but I'm expecting him to go back there, and we'll have to see where he ends up going because he's probably like Bayern Munich's Bayern Munich. I mean, that's tough to break into, but he's definitely a really talented player, and I think he's definitely earned a good move. And the last spot is one that I went back and forth on. I ended up going with Luca de la Torre over Yunus Musa. I think they are both having pretty similar seasons, just being good players in La Liga. I think I'm giving it to Luca de la Torre because I think he exceeded expectations, while Musa, well, he did become a starter for a good bit, and he was playing in the center of midfield. He wasn't. He was kind of losing time towards the end of the year, especially as Valencia got into their relegation fight, while Luca de la Torre ended up becoming more and more important to Celta Vigo as the season went on. So because of that, and just him having a good year, I think that I'm giving it to Luca de la Torre for the last spot in the midfield. But Yunus Musa did have a good year, so I want to give, or well, it wasn't that great for him by the standards that he set, but he's probably fourth on this list. And lastly, I'm going up top with two strikers. No wingers in this team, which is kind of weird given it's probably our best position. But Pulisic had a bad year. Weah, he was actually not that bad when he was playing right back, but I feel like putting him in at right back is kind of like not a success for Tim Weah, so I didn't want to give him that there. So I'm going with two strikers. First and less obvious is Haji Wright, who I'm going with. He had a very strong season, continuing his goal scoring form in Turkey. I'm just putting him in over Ricardo Pepi. I mean, Pepi did have a very good year, and I think that he's really flashing his potential now, but his team did get relegated as opposed to Wright's squad, who I think had a pretty solid year. He's been just continuing his dominance with his goal scoring form and kind of similar to Pepe, he's really growing into his potential. I mean, I think if you haven't heard the story, when Pulisic was started by or was scouted by Borussia Dortmund, they were actually looking for Haji Wright. They were scouting him for that game, and they just noticed Christian Pulisic. And there's a reason why they were looking at Wright. Just such a big striker, physical presence. His goal scoring form back then was very good, and he's really growing into that potential. And I could see him getting a very good move abroad. We'll have to see where he ends up this year. I think he could easily move to the championship, maybe like a lower tier Premier League squad. He has the physical presence that you could do that does well in the Premier League, and we'll have to see where he ends up. But Haji Wright has definitely earned a spot on this team, and he's had a very good year. I mean, he was even a goal scorer at the World Cup, as little as he knew about that goal. But I think he's kind of an underrated player for the U.S. men's national team, and hoping he gets a couple more chances. Well, not at the expense of our number one guy, Flo Balogun, who number one player this year, established himself as a top goal scorer in Ligue 1 with Ream. I think he might get a chance with Arsenal. We'll have to see. And I think he's going to be a very good player. I mean, he's single. Like, listen, I like Pepe, I like Haji Wright, but striker was a weak position for the squad. And Balogun comes in and immediately turns into his strength. And I'm very excited to see what he can do for the U.S. men's national team. Going to be watching that game against Mexico and going to be all eyes on him and really excited to see what he can do because, man, such a talented player. And hoping that he can continue this form. I think he will. I think when you look at his numbers, he might have actually underperformed. He should be even better next season. And I'm really excited to see what we can do. So that's my team of the season for the U.S. men's national team. Ethan Horvath in goal, Tim Ream, Mark McKenzie, and Cameron Carter-Vickers at the back, Bryan Reynolds at right back, Jedi Robinson at left back, Tyler Adams, Malik Tillman, and Luca de la Torre in midfield, and with Haji Wright and Folarin Balogun up top. And I think this is a pretty solid team. And when you look at around the squad, I think we can say the U.S. players had a pretty decent year abroad. I mean, I know a lot of the star power players weren't exactly excelling, but I think we had some pretty good performances, and like even guys I didn't include. Gio Reyna didn't have the year that he would have wanted, but he popped up with a lot of good goals for Dortmund. Tim Weah, not the year we expected, but he wasn't bad by any means for Lille, and really got to show off his versatility. And because of that, I feel pretty good about this. Good center back performances. Jedi got even better. Right back's got some more competition now. Tyler Adams got to solidify himself as a really good player, and we've got a new striker who looks like a beast. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positives we can take from this year, and hopefully we can turn that positive into a Nations League win. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. See ya.